I've never met a priest who could tell you anything about heaven, but they knew every square inch of hell. They should. They built it. Ticker. Warframe. The Daily Grind, Chapter 220. Oh, pardon me, James said as he brushed past a rat roach with glittering purple fur as he moved through the hall of their LA branch toward his office. Then he let himself think about that for a second before he turned and stopped his momentum with a couple of backward steps. Smoke? He guessed the name of the rat roach he'd just passed, trying to remember which one had the extra arm that came from their elbow and which had the arm that came from their shoulder. The rat roach cocked her head back at him, the chitin around her neck creaking as she did so. Slowly, she raised one arm at James, the other two held against her chest in a sling. I have so many questions, and you still can't talk, can you? James ran a hand down his face. Why are you purple? No, more important, are you all right? What happened to your arms? Also, was there something you needed help with up here? Why am I asking you things when you can't answer me? His words trailed into each other. James had made the mistake of rolling out of bed on this miserable Thursday well after Sarah had left their apartment, and so instead of replacing his sleep with her sleep, he had replaced his sleep with sugar and caffeine instead, and it was only just starting to hit him. Smoke looked like his questions were starting to panic her, her mismatched row of eyes flickering around the open floor of the office as her legs tensed and her good hand clenched into a claw. James noticed immediately, and started to correct himself, but it was one of the other people that was actually doing real work up here this afternoon that came to her rescue. "Is this man bothering you, dear?" The most business-dressed woman James had ever seen in the Order, and he counted Karen in that estimation, asked Smoke. James recognized her a little bit. She was one of the survivors from the office, though he didn't know what her role here was. Before he could get distracted by the fact that somebody had actually worn a power suit to work here, Smoke shook her head, the rat roach panting with deep breaths and covering her mouth with her good paw. James held up his own hands in an apology. "Sorry, I got carried away." He met Smoke's eyes and tipped his head down. "Didn't mean to overwhelm you." Smoke caught her breath, curled her paw into a rough approximation of a thumbs up, while the other woman turned to James. "Why are you here, actually? Did you need help finding anything?" she asked him. I have an office here," James said sheepishly. "I'm not missing that often. Come on." He held out a hand to indicate the door to his corner office. The woman looked past him and then back to his face. "That's Rufus's office," she stated. "I'm not... You... Rufus stole my office?" James raised his eyebrows. "I knew he had ambition, I just didn't think I'd ever be the target of it," he joked. "Sorry, hi, I'm James. I work here. Also, I'm reasonably certain I saved your life once, but I cannot remember your name and I'm really sorry." The woman took the hand he'd extended and shook it briskly. "Kathy, and yes, I remember, you do know that Rufus uses your office, yes?" "We're talking about the same Rufus, right?" James asked with raised eyebrows, while smoke slunk out of sight around the edge of the small hallway. "Yay big? Nice guy? Stapler?" "Yes." Kathy pointed upward without looking to where neatly attached strings of paper clips ran along the ceiling like a secondary walkway. Her finger traced a path to where someone had installed a small extra glass door in the wall over the door to James's office. "He's very helpful," she said. "I feel like I may not be here often enough." James cleared his throat. "Anyway, I actually do have a few people who should be here for an orientation thing in a few minutes, so I'm going to re-steal my office." "All right, that's good. Don't bother my coworker again, please." Kathy nodded politely at him. "Oh, she's working with recovery now." James couldn't keep a delighted smile off his face. "That's good. Though what happened to her arms?" Kathy's demeanor cracked as she winced, wrinkles and laugh lines showing on her face as she glanced behind her. "Nothing, really," she sighed. "Poor girl tripped. That was enough. She hides it a lot, but we can tell she's hurting all day." Kathy glanced back at James. "I don't suppose there's anything in the works for that?" There might be. I'd check in with Deb, but she should be doing regular checkups on all our new residents. If nothing else, we can work on getting her a string of purple orbs and see if that helps. James thought for a second. Organizing where orbs go is kind of a giant mess at the moment, but we might have a whole bunch of surplus that we're never going to get around to copying in the basement. I just sent Reed a message. I'll let you know before I leave today if we can at least roll the dice a few dozen times on her. The plug in the neck is a bit uncomfortable in the shower, but it does seem to be useful, doesn't it? Kathy said softly, her voice shifting to sympathetic. James just smiled back. The circumstances aren't great, I admit, but now there are circumstances, and it's pretty cool, he agreed. Also, I can be online all the time, which I am certain is bad for my brain, but whatever. He glanced past Kathy and the handful of other people working at desks up here, making use of the floor space to get real work done, to where the elevator doors had just opened. Ah, and I think that is my first batch. Do you mind sending them my way? The two of them nodded an amicable goodbye, the way coworkers on good terms did, as James stepped back to the door to his office and watched Kathy take purposeful steps across their shared workspace to greet the four young men that had just stepped off the elevator. The first batch, as he'd mentioned. All of them homegrown American muscle with haircuts to match. He had two more groups later from similar situations from the Indian and Chinese analogues of rural Ohio. James hesitated halfway through his door, a knot of apprehension in his chest as he eyed them going through the first test for new people in the order. There were several Camercondas working here today, as well as Smoke, who was in a category all her own up here. And James wasn't ignorant to the fact that some people, especially in the tight-knit group that was Recovery, went about their days networked to each other. The office floor plan was mundane enough, but the presence of small things like the hanging paper clips, the vending machine with more buttons than could physically fit on it, and the eclectic decorations were the sorts of things that would draw curious looks, even if the non-human residents didn't. The four young men looked confused, but none of them were overtly hostile. As if to drive the point home, a Camerconda carrying a printout in their fangs slithered across their path and back to the lower desk that they used personally. James clinically observed which of them tensed up or muttered something to themselves before he ducked back into his office and took a seat behind the desk to wait. And wait long he did not have to do. The office floor was not that large. It wasn't more than a minute before Kathy had knocked on his door and opened it to show the four in. James greeted them and motioned to sit, waiting for them to get settled before he started talking. Looking over the four young men, he wasn't quite sure what to feel. On the one hand, he knew, intellectually, that these guys were pushed into unhealthy behaviors by the structure of a culture around them that incentivized that behavior. But they also looked and had the vibe of the kinds of people who he got bullied by in high school, and suddenly he felt a spike of doubt about his own good intentions. Which was stupid. He'd said everyone when he talked about helping everyone. If he had to get over his own bullshit brain's hang-ups sometimes, that was his job. Good afternoon, he started with. Hope you've been having a good vacation so far. They all looked at each other before one of them, a broad-shouldered figure with short sandy blonde hair, spoke up. LA's been cool. Hotel has a huge pool, but, He paused, Midwest accent on hold, while he briefly considered what he was going to say. Sir, why are we... Alright, first things first. I'm James. Nice to meet you. Just James, not sir. I get enough of that from everyone else here. I want to be upfront about the fact that I'm not comfortable with honorifics or reinforcements of my gender, James said quickly, punctuating it all with a professional smile. You're wondering why you, when you're a bunch of nobodies, right? One of them scowled at him. One of them had a smug little smirk on his face that made James want to either punch him or send him to work with JP as punishment. Punishment for the smirking guy or punishment for JP, he wasn't sure yet, but regardless, none of them looked pleased with the comment. One of the other boys nodded, though. Yeah, what do you want from us? His voice had a little more of a drawl, but the same kind of tempo as his friend. Okay, you want the clean answer? James asked, and saw expectation in their faces. Well, we're recruiting for something a little different than what you'd all planned for, but the simple version is this. I need people who are tough, adaptable, and smart. He noted the smug smirk guy rolled his eyes, while one of the others tried and failed to stay stoic. Yeah, I know that guy. He pointed across his desk at Smirky. Misses at least one of those qualities, but the rest of you fit. Or you could. You might not think it, but someone saw it in you, and that's why you're here. James ignored the new scowl pointed his way and leaned back in his chair, resisting the urge to spin in it. Let me ask you all something. What were you planning to do with your lives, near future anyway, before you ended up here? Army, sir, one of them said before wincing. Army, Mr. James. Navy, said another guy, before Army came in from the last two. None of them called him sir, at least. And wouldn't that just be a fucking waste, James said flatly. We'd like to offer you a chance to go a different direction with your career path. What direction is that? The blonde kid asked. And why does this sound illegal? Because it's probably illegal, though our lawyer hasn't yet been able to tell me how, James said, still smiling. As for what we want, well, initially we want to hire you for security roles. You'll be equipped with skills and enhancements needed to fit that job. You'll essentially be hired in the capacity as bodyguards, but in general, our organization is somewhat chaotic with job titles and roles within our structure. It's likely within 3 months you'll either know if you want to move on to something else, or commit to a longer period within the role. So you want us to be soldiers anyway? James wobbled a hand in front of his face. We want you to be capable, but I don't expect you to fight a war for me, or get shot. Actually, with the exception of my dumbass, we're actually getting pretty good at not getting shot these days. His mouth twitched in a self-depreciating grin as he turned to address one of the young men. Yes, I see the disbelief you have going on there. Don't worry, I don't mind. You're still being weird about this, the first guy stated. And cryptic? Yeah, it's a bad habit. Okay, here's the deal. We are an organization of people with access to literal actual magic. We want to use it to build a better world. Some people might want to stop us. I need people to help us keep expanding our operations and to get between us and the people who might want to stop us. You guys are a great opportunity because your life prospects suck. He leaned forward, a darkly comical look on his face. I'm going to be completely straight with you here. The reason we picked you, it's because you had literally no good options. That makes it really easy for us to swoop in and offer you a great option that's even better in comparison. That's super fucked up, man. Well, yeah, but is it more fucked up than the fact that 2 of you were straight-A students, 2 of you know how to run a farm single-handedly, 1 of you wrote a screenplay, and all of you were going to go into the military and get paid less than you would for working at McDonald's? James didn't explain how he knew that much about their lives. Maybe I just want to shoot stuff, one of them said defiantly. All right, you can get out, James told him flatly. We don't have time for your shit here, though I suspect you're just being an asshole to provoke me. He snorted in a non-laugh. Can I ask a question? Blondie asked a question, raising his hand. Go for it. What's with the snake drones? James blinked. Oh, they're people, he said. I'm disingenuously sorry if that was confusing. I kind of figured that when I said literal magic, it would have explained that. We have between 6 to 9 different species under our banner, depending on if you count engineers as human. No, you fucking don't, one of them said, sounding angry, like his time was being wasted. James nodded politely anyway. Alright, I know this isn't a traditional job interview, but typically, don't say that out loud until afterward, just as a heads up. Anyway, the snakes are called camerocondas. They're people? Blondie asked. Yep. Like, people? People? I have no idea what that's supposed to mean, I'm sorry, James admitted bluntly. It sounds bad when you say it that way, though. Are they, human or something? No, they're camerocondas. James narrowed his eyes. This is going slightly worse than I expected. He sighed. Look, here's the deal. You 4 are already vetted. This isn't much of an interview. If you say yes, you can have a 3-month trial run with us, which you will be fully paid for. If you don't like it, afterward you can dip out. Otherwise, You just keep going. Stick around. Help out. Our pay is decent. We essentially pay bonuses for extra responsibilities you take on within the organization. The only qualifier is, if there's too many interpersonal problems with you, you're not exactly out, but we are going to shuffle you around a lot. There's a whole section in the operations manual about expected behavior, for reference. What if, the smug guy started slowly, we don't actually think you have magic, and that sounds really fucking stupid? James sighed. Hey, you, he asked the open air. An assist, please. He closed his eyes, letting the navigator pivot a small part of his mind to remembering the feeling of forward motion in a vehicle, wind streaming past from the open window next to his head. The feeling of feathers tickling along his neck and chin reached him, more real than memory, and James opened his eyes as Zhu finished manifesting. Solid, dusty orange light of his form carpeting James's shoulder and left arm in a layered feathered limb. I can also blow up your phones by thinking about it, but I figured this was more polite, James said. And less expensive, Zhu added, in his voice like tires on gravel. Fewer dead maps. Google Maps doesn't actually literally die when I break a phone. Come on, James rolled his eyes. The maps are in the cloud or something. It is rude, Zhu prodded at him. Sure. James looked up to the four young men, half of whom were pressed back in their chairs, half of them were leaning forward, all of them with wide, curious eyes. Even the snarky asshole, who James couldn't really blame, he'd been the same way at that age. 3 months, he said. $5,000 a month as a training rate. No long-term obligations, no enforced service. You'll get to keep a lot of the magic. The four of them, even the rude one, tripped over themselves to say yes. James covered the ground rules with them in rapid succession. Kindness was the dominant emotion they built their foundation on. Inhumanity was no excuse for hostility. Cooperation was the word of the day. Do good, recklessly, but understand that that meant that sometimes you would be cleaning up your own fuck-ups so you could do more good. When they'd had questions, one of them had asked about if this was dangerous, and James had been honest about the fact that they didn't need security personnel because it was safe, and also that they had taken losses in the past. The kid asked if there was some way to set it up so his dad got his paycheck to handle medical bills, and when James got the details of the situation, he had cryptically informed the new recruit that they could maybe help with the cancer, too. All right, he'd said, after they'd signed the papers and gotten the basics hashed out. If you're up for starting now, you can check in with Nate or one of his people downstairs. He paused, holding his office door open for the group, and reached out a hand to shake with each of them. Welcome to the Order of Endless Rooms. Wait, hang on, you guys own the whole building? Blondie asked. No, James said. Another one of them looked like he was trying not to laugh himself. It's kind of a weird name, isn't it? Take the stairwell door next to the elevator, James said with a mischievous smile. The one to the right. Let me know how the name feels after you get downstairs. They're not the worst or anything. James was talking to Alana, the two of them using their skulljacks and the Lair's Wi-Fi to speak to each other in a way more intimate than any phone call could ever be, as if they were not just next to each other, but literally inside each other's heads. It wasn't a perfect system, as he'd noticed he'd gotten in the elevator and kind of gotten some packet loss-induced headache, but it was something weirdly more casual than calling his partner. It was more like being in the same room as they did their own thing, and knew that they could just chat whenever they felt like it, if they did. It also helped that Anesh could slip in whenever he wanted to. Anesh and Sarah, actually. Their friend had an open invitation, but was still skittish around the Skulljacks. In a spatially displaced basement, Alana closed her eyes and leaned back in the chair she was sitting in Response's break room, waiting for when she and her partner were needed for the day. That's a pretty big qualifier, she spoke into James's thoughts. Bah, he sent back, as he navigated a completely different basement, the one assigned to research. I don't know what I mean, I guess. I kind of just got used to us, and the whole conversation was just slightly jarring. They aren't instantly accepting. They aren't. I mean, they've just got some pretty shitty attitudes about some things. They are teenagers, Alana countered. I challenge you, James riposted, to tell me that as a teenager you wouldn't have been all in on living with non-human life. I mean, I wanted to live with you and Sarah as soon as we were out of high school, so I think that's obvious, Alana shot back at him. James barked out a physical laugh at that, and then sheepishly ducked his head as a passing girl hauling a heavy crate shot him a weird look. Okay, that got me, he told Alana. I'm just iffy about this. We've got 20 new people, every one of them took the offer, and they all make me uncomfortable. I just have this grim suspicion I'm going to end up punching someone through a wall after I hear a slur for the rat roaches, you know? They still need a better name. Alana took that tangent into a new line of thought. I kind of want to go with Chimera, but that seems weird, like it doesn't fit. The weird and new part of talking through Skelljacks was that Alana's nod came across as she replied, as well as her answer. Yeah, and they aren't half-family dog. Oh my god, you're the worst. James's reply practically overlapped with his second sentence of, and I love you. What about amalgams? Alana didn't even wait for a reply, her thoughts bumping into each other, much like James's did. No, that sounds dumb, and makes them seem like they're just kind of slapped together, which I guess they are. Also, I hate the sewer, in case I haven't said that today. At least we've gotten some of its victims out. James sighed as he signed into their server room and went through the process of turning off all the different magical programs that were running and giving him immunities to things. He'd forgotten to do it after the climb, and he needed to be better about it so that other people could make use of the resource they had. In theory, it wouldn't take much effort for somebody else to just click the button twice and do it for him, but there was a standing policy to never take away someone's immunities if you didn't know what room they were in. He didn't stop talking to Alana while he went through the quiet process. Anyway, I don't know. I'm still worried about the new guys. Nate's plan sounds good on paper. I just don't know if it's going to work. Hey, I mean, if it means we're getting more response teammates, that's cool. Alana sent him a shrug as she bit her lip and carefully aimed an overhand lob of her coffee cup into the garbage can from across the room. She opted not to share the feeling of missing an easy shot with her boyfriend, though. Wait, are we? Getting more people? Not at first. James stepped back out into the hall, reflexively catching the door with his foot as it swung closed so it wouldn't slam. They're getting an orientation, bunch of relevant skill orbs, and assignment as backup to some of our rogues who are going to be doing some stuff that needs more active security. They might swap later, but right now we need more proactive defenses. James shrugged into the empty hall as he walked. Also, I think recovery needs more people anyway. They've been working a lot more than I thought, and Karen's doing that thing where she's trying to be frugal despite the fact that we can print money. There was a long pause, and James wondered if Alana might have gotten called away or something, despite her presence in his mind still being active. Then her words slipped into his thoughts again. We designed a compressed space explicitly to easily duplicate mundane material. Why the fuck aren't we just copying money? She demanded of him. Also, what does recovery actually do these days? We're not copying money because of counterfeiting stuff, I guess. Also something about intrinsic value. James mentally swatted the question away, a slight fog clouding his thoughts as he failed to grasp the quick answer that he knew he should know. As for recovery, they do a lot. He rapidly compiled a mental list and pushed it over to her in a format that was easy to process. They work with victims of dungeons to put their lives back together, they manage scheduling for therapy and support groups, they handle a lot of our medical functions, including being the ones that the cancer cure distribution goes through. They don't actually include the group of people who are going really, really deep on Skulljack use, or our accounting or legal departments, but there's a ton of overlap, so it's kind of a blurred line. Also, I think Karen has the pulse of all those different things anyway. For some reason I thought recovery and research had overlap, Alana mused. James hummed at her across their connection. They do in a way. Like, research's job is to take the magic we have and figure out how it works and what it does, what the limits are. That's pretty broad, but functionally that's their directive. Oh, and they're supposed to then take what they learn and communicate it effectively. And recovery takes that information and figures out how to convert it into help. Okay, but like, what about arms? Alana asked. Camerconda arms, I mean. Or I guess we could probably just make some pretty fucking cool arms for people who are missing limbs, couldn't we? With the Skulljack port for... Huh. Should we be doing that? Maybe. Also, like I said, it's a gray area. Our whole structure is chaotic and messy. We really only work because we've got people who are actually doing the job of going around and making communications happen and solving problems. He leaned on the corner of the hall, staying out of the way as he paused and finished his conversation before going back to what he was doing. And then we've got response, which... Alana shot him an overlapping thought. Hey, why are all our divisions R words? She reset to the first sentence. Response, which I guess overlaps with both of them, huh? Recovery helps the victims put their lives back together, research gives us the tools we use. Okay, neat. Though we still need more people if we're ever going to successfully replace the police. Gotta say. So, get back to hiring, buddy. First off, you're not my boss. James playfully dropped the words into her mind. Second off, the response research recovery thing was a coincidence at first. Then Momo decided she wanted to call her branch of research Ritual, and she made it worse on purpose. Oh, and JP convincing Nate to call our intelligence branch Rogues because the title we use for active threat management personnel is Night, so he made it worse too. But I don't know if it's on purpose, but it's JP, so probably. He shook his head with an exasperated smile as he watched a trio of Shalaxes in their pen in the middle of the research hub area, all of them scrambling up over the rock someone had put there, their corded mass of legs dragging their shells forward as they raced to get to a handful of yellow orbs that had been dropped in for their lunch. Oh, also, Response isn't a police replacement, he added. What? Alana asked. On her end, in physical space, someone signaled her, and she kicked herself to a standing position instantly. Also, I gotta go soon. Talk fast, she said, as she and Smoke and Ember checked their low-threat gear loadout and got ready to take a telepad destination. You ready? She asked the Camerconda in her speaking voice. Set to act, Smoke and Ember nodded. Finish your conversation. Okay, quick answer. James tried to info dump as fast as he could. Also, we can talk later tonight, but basically we're not going to change things with just us, so Response isn't meant to be a systemic replacement. We're doing 3 things. 1, helping. 2, we're training our own first generation of peacekeepers for whatever place we end up making. And 3, we can shove an example front and center of how other cops can do better. That's it. We help, we be a good example, we be super passive-aggressive about it. Or maybe just aggressive. I don't know. Huh. Okay. Neat. Also, I gotta go, Alana said. Give me a countdown? She offered, and then she and James ran through a rapid 3, 2, 1 before they both broke their minds apart. They'd gotten the advice from some of the office survivors who said it helped with the disorientation, and it really did seem to work wonders. All right, she said out loud, reaching over and setting a hand on Smoke and Ember's head, grabbing the telepad that Marcus had just finished writing on and was currently handing her. What do we got? Home intrusion. Seems like impersonal burglary. Don't be mean, Marcus said. Alana grinned as she tore the page and vanished along with the Camerconda. Over in the research basement, James blinked as his girlfriend cut away the connection and headed off to do something useful, while he resigned himself to similarly doing something useful but a little more socially exhausting. He passed by a pair of faces he didn't recognize and a handful he did, all deeply focused on whatever they were working on at their desks. A couple of them had one of the Camerconda motorized arm packs half disassembled, rigorously noting problem spots. Someone else was entering a batch of new potions into inventory, and another had a desk covered in circuit boards that made extensive use of the emerald chips from the office that grew programs over time. Almost everyone had something plugged into their Skulljack, too. These were the kind of people who got really excited about what that technology represented. They were highly drawn to the research basement, one way or another. Eventually, without getting too distracted by the friendly Shalaxes that lived here, and who were energetic today and demanding affection, James made it past the main floor, down a narrow concrete access hallway, and to the locked and protected room where the Order kept the really dangerous stuff. So far, the really dangerous stuff was basically just the collected writings of the insane cult leader mechanic who had slaughtered a whole town in Tennessee during an attempt at apotheosis, and also the loot drops of all the fallen Order members that they had been able to collect. The latter, they didn't know what to do with. They didn't have consent from any of those people to experiment with them. And as for the former, they just didn't want that being used again. Mostly. Sort of. At the semicircular desk outside the sealed room, in an alcove that shouldn't have fit in the space, sat Davis. The older man, looking incredibly good for his age thanks to a series of purple orbs, wasn't doing much of anything aside from sipping at a mug of something hot and watching through the security glass window of their new vault. "Hey," James greeted him with a wave. "Well, well, well, look who's finally come down to our secret hideout," Davis said with a grin. "Here to visit Reed?" He gestured with his mug toward the window. First off, that's a great way to keep people from actually visiting, and I see that you know that, okay. James nodded as he caught Davis's amused expression. Great. Well, I'm here to talk to you, actually. Wait, why is Reed here? James finished approaching and leaned on the desk, turning to see what Davis had motioned to. Inside the secure room, Reed had arranged the loose sheets of notepaper around a table and was moving between them, his fingers alternating between tapping on things he focused on and unconsciously curling and yanking on bits of his hair in frustration. "Has he finally gone mad?" James asked, without any real concern. Davis snorted. "Probably. He says he thinks he can build a dungeon detector." He did not elaborate further. "What do you need me for?" I'm now intently curious what the fuck Reed is doing, but okay, I'll talk to him later." James tore his eyes away from his view of the beleaguered pier through the mesh wire of the security glass. Pushing himself back, he addressed Davis in a less casual way. "I'm here to check in on how the alchemists are doing, before I make my decision." "Oh?" "Oh," James nodded. "Not a terrifying, life-altering decision, to be clear. It's just that Niall and Red both asked to explore some of the dungeons, and I'm curious if I should approve it." Davis cleared his throat with a harsh noise, setting his drink down with a contradictory smooth grace. "Well, what do you want to know?" "I don't even know where to start." James threw his hands up with a short laugh. "What do I even ask here? We're in uncharted territory. Obviously we've talked about this repeatedly. We have check-ins, but this feels different. So, okay, actually let's start with a basic check-in." That put the conversation back on familiar ground, and Davis nodded as he dropped into the pattern of his report. "Amelia, Red, she's doing fine. The woman is still a workaholic and doesn't want to talk to anyone unless it's about curing Parkinson's, which is her latest fixation. Emotionally, well, she's been going to therapy, but she keeps quiet. Asked for a few red orbs last week, and for once it wasn't to turn them into a potion, so I okayed it. It's not that she doesn't feel anything, though. She just doesn't prioritize it. She's got a lifetime of hiding everything." "That sounds familiar," James said, without thinking. "Hey, piss off, kid." Davis grinned. "But you're right. It's the same as for a lot of our members in my respectful age bracket. Worse for her, because, if she ever did react, she'd get jumped on for being excitable or unstable, so she got cold instead. But she's not evil, and she's working on herself. Progress continues." "What about Niall and Tigris?" "Tigris isn't doing well, mentally or physically," Davis said. "He's 80 years old, though he doesn't look it, and his heart and liver are shot. Deb wants to talk about getting him a backup heart, but he does not give a damn. He's given up. Doesn't think he can ever do enough to make up for his part in things, doesn't care that we don't see it that way. Niall's, well, William's not depressed. Your girl says he doesn't feel right, but I could have told you that. He's an ass. He thinks he's better than this, better than everyone around him, and yet, still making progress." James suppressed a sigh with a wince. "I'd heard about Tigris. I don't... You know what? Let's focus on the two I'm here for, so I don't dive headfirst into existential dread today. Sure. That normally a problem for you? Endlessly. James turned to lean on the desk again, facing away from Davis. So, how are Niall and Red doing overall with our culture? Oh, they hate it, Davis said bluntly. Not entirely, but enough. Remember, these are people who are used to employing housekeepers and eating four-star meals every day, and sure, we get paid, but they're really, really bitter about the fact that they see it as being paid back their own money. James tipped his head back to stare at the cracked concrete of the ceiling. To be fair, we did essentially take everything from them, financially. He paused. What do they want? Like, not what do they want in terms of liquid assets. Don't answer that, I don't care. I mean, what would make them embrace our culture more? I think a lot of what they think they're missing is actually just the effects of wealth, not the wealth itself. Davis tapped a pen on the desk as he answered. They want to feel important. Status symbols like fancy cars and mansions were how they showed it off, but also they miss all the little comforts. 80-year-old Scotch, dinners with French names, and living in the foothills isolated from prying eyes. I refuse to believe you didn't write that answer in advance, James joked, and then felt a spike of discomfort as Davis ignored the joke and stared at him blankly. Okay, he said, moving on. So they want, what, to feel special? And they don't care that they're brewing cancer cures, or what? Well, Amelia's self-actualized enough to be satisfied with the work itself emotionally. Niall wants other people to think he's special, though. He looked at money as a way to keep score, and he was winning. Now he's not. James thought to himself. You know, we're obviously not fixing the wealth issue for them, but we can hit the creature comfort thing. Like, we could change how we do food around here. There's a couple ideas for improved selection and quality that have just sort of been on the back burner. We already do a whole even split of magic but you can trade for stuff thing for most people. We could formalize just getting an orange enhanced apartment that's the size of Texas for them. And I don't know, we're probably not going to be figuring out time dilation anytime soon, so 100-year age scotch is off the table, but maybe just tell Niall his new project is coming up with some kind of fancy liquor potion? Fascinating. Those are all terrifying thoughts, Davis told him. But I'm willing to try, as long as I don't have to be the one to test the potion. You know you literally never have to test the potions, James told him. Especially since a lot of them are not healthy. He silently mourned for the growing number of lab rats who had given their lives in the line of duty for our chemical progress. R.I.V. noble rats, he muttered, slightly less silently. Anyway, back on topic. Red and Niall. For some reason, they think that dungeon delving will make them better alchemists. You know anything about this? Of course I know something about it. I wrote the paper on it, Davis said. There is a direct correlation between time spent inside dungeons and... call it instinct, maybe. The ability of the individual to perform a few different tasks, recognizing dungeon tech as one of them, but also, more specifically, absorbing blue orbs and communicating with infomorphs. The basic principle is repeatably provable. We're just waiting on budgeting people and time to isolate variables and test thoroughly. James refrained from opening the file right away with his skulljack, and instead tilted his head to give Davis a side-eyed look. Okay, I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to need more depth on that research than you think. 'Cause I can't feel the Winter's Climb magic items, but a Rush can, so there's something going on there. There aren't any dungeon tech items from the climb. Davis let himself get sidetracked for a minute. We've got some objects retrieved, but no one's been able to determine the effects from them. Huh, okay, well that's weird too. My point is mostly that I wouldn't be surprised if you need to fine-tune which dungeon enhances which awareness. Hang on, are we actually leveling up? He turned and placed his palms on the desk, leaning forward with sudden enthusiasm. Davis raised his pen and placed it on James's forehead, pushing him backwards steadily. You're not the first person to say that. I refuse to comment, he told him. It doesn't matter anyway. The point is, Niall and Red want to go delving. Yeah, do you think they should? James asked, easing off on his excitement. Niall seems, well, like he's still an ass. He's not very sociable, no, Davis said diplomatically. But you actually want my opinion? Yeah, you should let him. With a heavy escort. Like I said, they're in great shape for our age, but they're not up for a fight. Red just wants her work to do great things. Niall wants... Well, what he wants is stupid. What he needs is people. Kid, I've done 3 delves, and then I swore it off forever, but I still keep in touch with the people I went in with, and not just because we all work here. Best case, you give that antisocial jackass some people he can connect with. Worst case, he dies, then he's not our problem anymore. Jesus Christ, James bit out, caught off guard by Davis's casual hostility. Also, if it works the way they want, Davis shrugged, tugging at the shoulder of his gray college alumni sweatshirt. Well, then we get people who have a lot of experience working with the sap of knowledge, who are now better at it, who are making potions for us. Seems like a win for everybody. James nodded, pressing his fingertips together as he sucked in a breath. Okay, so I should make my real concern clear, he said slowly. Oftentimes, on delves, one or more of the delvers will end up with innate, non-transferable skills or powers. Some of these have, traditionally, been absurdly dangerous. I guess what I'm asking here is, if we gave these to a rocket launcher, would they point it back at us to get what they wanted? Red? No, she's pragmatic. Niall might, but I think even he would think twice about it at this point. Well, I keep saying he's an ass, and I mean it, don't get me wrong, kid. But he's not evil. Well, he's not maliciously evil. He did evil because he was stupid and short-sighted and greedy and a few other words I won't say in polite company. Don't you call me that. But he wasn't anything worse than someone who didn't give a shit who their business hurt, as long as the business was profitable. That's it. He doesn't have any opinions or ideology for you to fight. Davis gave another rapid burst of taps on the desk from his pen. Have you talked to him yet? I was waiting to see if I should, James said. It's on my to-do list if you think this is a good idea. I think you should, Davis said with a flat look. But I also think he's never going to get better if you don't give him a little trust. James gnawed at his lip, looking back at the sealed room Reed was still pacing around the table in. He wants to be recognized, huh? He said. So why not just do that, right? Let him know that we see that he's working with us in the language he knows how to speak. Kind of a dramatic way to put it, but you do you, Davis said in a dismissive, dry voice. You need anything else from me today? He asked, bringing his still steaming mug back up to his mouth. Any new potions I should know about, since I'm actually kind of bad at sorting through this whole floor's chaotic mess of reports? James asked. Davis met his eyes with a disappointed look of someone who is being academically judgmental, but he still answered anyway. The luck potion doesn't work in a repeatable way, so that's out. The fertilizer potion we're still working on ironing the kinks out of. There's 2 we don't know the effects of that are technically safe to drink, but we don't even know what they do. 2 that are fairly useless also, unless you want your fingernails to be opalescent or your saliva to taste like whipped cream. Taste like or actually be? James narrowed his eyes. Taste like. Then no, I don't have a use for that. Davis opened his mouth like he was going to ask a question about that, and then thought better of it, shook his head, and angled his mug to point James away from his desk. Get out of here. You have better things to do than entertain me. Yeah, about that. Do you want a book or something? I can bring you a thing off my shelf. Got one. Davis tapped the back of his neck, getting a nod from James, who waved over his shoulder as he headed back out to try to see if he remembered the layout of the hallways here, or if he was going to do another 2 loops of the whole giant basement before he found the elevator again. James went through the process of double-checking the attitudes and consent of new recruit batches another 2 times, adding 7 more people to their temporary roster and bringing the order up to, well, more people than before. He had a hard time keeping track of the number. There was a document somewhere, he was sure, and he was reasonably confident they had over 200 humans at this point. A large chunk of them were still the survivors of Officium Mundi, but more and more they were adding new people to their operations. Outside people. Whether that was through JP's cryptic method of finding new reconnaissance helpers, the assimilation of other vaguely magical groups, adding in survivors from other horrible events, just regular hiring, or their recruitment of new semi-official allies through their cancer cure distribution program, the Order was growing. Response especially was hungry for new people. James may have told Alana that they weren't trying to actively replace the police anymore, but Harvey sure didn't stop pushing just as hard. And with them doing everything from conflict resolution to search and rescue to sometimes traffic control, Response was eager to get new minds and hands trained up to join them. Human or otherwise, no one in the Order was averse to working with non-humans at this point. Everyone who was got a long conversation about their behavior and how to fix it, and if they didn't fix it, they got the boot. That had only happened a couple of times so far, but James especially had basically no interest in humoring racists. He felt it was important to be blunt about that fact, as well as the fact that those people were racist, and that their presence would not be missed. Camerocondas and rat roaches kept being added to their ranks in ones and twos. Every new delve was a chance to kidnap them away from their forced servitude or abusive warrens and into the clean, compassionate world the Order was building. And it was kidnapping. James also refused to shy away from the truth of it. The Order, himself personally, were making a value judgment here about how people should live, including people that weren't like them all the time. And he didn't care. Every time a Cameroconda found something they had a passion for, or a rat roach got to eat a meal without being afraid, he saw that as a complete win. They didn't have more of whatever Ben was, though, and James still needed to talk to the Ben about how to best accommodate the somewhat unique life that had joined up recently. They also didn't have any more stapler crabs that were quite as smart as Rufus. Apparently the little creatures didn't seem to have an upper limit on mental growth, they just all tended to die before it mattered. Which was kind of grim, and also said a lot about just how absurdly lucky James and Rufus had both gotten to have met each other early on. And now, Rufus was repaying that luck by giving James a new problem. Currently, James was eating lunch and stressing out about the upcoming semi-planned meeting with Harlan, among other things, when Rufus found him. The stapler, who apparently didn't have a physical growth limit either and was now the size of a large house cat, slowly lowered himself down from the ceiling onto James's table. James watched silently, trying to keep his expression stoically unimpressed as he chewed. Eventually, Rufus dropped the last half-foot from the paperclip line that he was dangling from, leaving a chitinous scratching as he got his legs underneath him and stood up, dusting off one of his forelimbs with another jointed ballpoint pen before he made sure the small satchel he had on his flank was still in place. He looked up at James with a wide, organic eye and blinked once. "Hey," James said easily. Rufus waved back, having been acknowledged, and then started pulling documents out of his bag to lay out on the table in front of James. "You know," James said as he quickly grabbed a napkin and wiped a drop of some kind of sauce off the surface before Rufus dropped his important documents into it, "I have an office, if this is a business meeting." He waited for Rufus to stop what he was doing and look up at him with an equally unimpressed eye. "Apparently we share an office, actually." James couldn't finish his sentence without cracking a smile, his facade falling away. The species Rufus was a part of didn't have any kind of natural reaction that equated to laughter, but that didn't mean he didn't feel humor, and he had found a way to express it. Rapid, dragging taps of his forelegs on the table acting as a good signifier that he both got and appreciated the joke. "Okay, seriously." James pushed his lunch away and tried to let go of the dozen half-baked plans for upgrading how they did communal food without equally upscaling food waste. "What you got here?" He looked over what Rufus had brought him. A lot of it was printouts of things James was aware of, and in one case, a thing he had written himself. Most of it revolving around the clutterescent life form of stuffed animals. Whatever amalgamation of different real-world creature parts that Frederick was, Frederick wasn't unique. Not exactly, anyway. The attic dungeon had made a lot more things like him, with varying mixes of the component parts. A little less spider here, a little more salamander there. Usually the same amount of raccoon. The stuffed animals grew up on an initially rapid scale, up to a certain point. Apparently, they did get spawned in as infants, and while that meant something different than it did for a human, they had what amounted to a very rapid early childhood, up to the point that their growth slowed down, and their mental development leveled out to something more like a human around the age of 5 to 6. From what Frederick shared, the process was deeply confusing, but amounted to what felt like a chunk of knowledge exploding in his mind until he knew what he was supposed to know as a foundation. How to use his body, how to communicate, how to read, how to appreciate art. Frederick wasn't entirely unique as a stuffed animal. There were other stuffed animals now. What made Frederick kind of stand out was that Frederick had been aged up to something like a human teenager, not like a human child. The phrase like a human teenager was something that could be terrifying on its own, though. But in this case, because they hadn't actually been around for that long, no one knew what the life cycle of the stuffed animals was in general, or what their natural lifespan would be, if the dungeon life even had lifespans. As it stood, they had about 20 young stuffed animals, all of them about to plateau in their growth, along with reaching the phase where their minds stopped unfolding. And that's where the last thing Rufus had brought came up. "You want to fold them into the youth groups?" James asked, raising his eyebrows at Rufus over the page he was holding up to read. The stapler raised a pen in agreement. "That makes sense. They're basically kids. Fuck, we really need to get a proper school set up. If we start now, we can probably have that ready to go by September. Karen will murder me with whatever psychic powers she has if she hears me say that, but come on, we're us, right?" He asked it rhetorically, but Rufus gave vigorous agreement that showed more confidence than James actually had. "Anyway, yeah, so what are you thinking here? Or rather, is there a reason that we shouldn't just mix them in normally?" Rufus thought about it, and then started tapping bits of the operations manual on their species, specifically parts about development cycles and relative maturity, before referring to part of his own printed request. James nodded. "Right, I get that, but how do you determine when one of them goes from fitting into the 9 to 12 group to fitting into the 13 to 15 group? Because it's not going to be 3 years of time, and I think we both know that." He leaned back, Rufus mimicking the motion on the tabletop as the two of them thought. "Actually, this is kind of a problem for forming long-term social bonds, huh? If a stuffed animal only needs a year at the lower age bracket before moving on, that keeps them from forming friends at the same rate that humans do." He tapped his chin. "Am I being too human-centric here with this? Is this just something with no good solution that we should let happen? What are we prioritizing for here? Education? Socialization?" "Lunch!" said a voice to James's left, and he startled as he twitched his gaze sideways to see the familiar coils of frequency of sunlight approaching, setting a pair of plates on the table with the mechanical arms she was wearing on her back. Behind the Serpentine girl, Deb pulled over one of the Camerconda-specific chairs before claiming her own human seat next to Frequency. "You mind if we join you?" she asked James, a little late, leaning sideways to plant a quick kiss on the Camerconda before turning back and attacking her salad with the alacrity of a med school intern who had places to be. "I mean, no, but usually people ask that before sitting," James said. "This is faster, and we know you will say yes anyway," Frequency of Sunlight declared, and then stopped, freezing up in a stiff motion as if another Camerconda had locked her in their gaze. "Wait, no, that is wrong. May we sit here? I will not assume." James gave her an appreciative smile. "You're fine. I would have said yes anyway, you're right. But also thanks." He gave a worried look to Deb, who was eating mechanically, if that machine was a combine harvester. "You okay?" he asked. "M'fing," Deb said, unintelligibly, before swallowing heavily. "I've got a lot going on. I'm having a nice lunch with the person I love, so she won't worry that I'm not eating, and then I am going to run back to monitoring rat roach vitals from the new rescues to make sure no one dies, because Aaron cannot be trusted." "Really?" James asked. "Yes," Frequency said cheerfully, her Skulljack-connected speakers not requiring her to stop talking just because her mouth was full. It is me. I am the person she loves, and who is making her eat lunch so she does not wither and die, which is a thing humans do. That is true, yes, but I meant you not trusting your head nurse, James clarified, pointing at Deb, and getting a backup point from Rufus, who also wanted to know what the hell was up with that. She made some kind of aggressive growl around a forkful of tomato. He's not bad or anything, but he is, She trailed off, staring into space. You don't have a real complaint, do you? James asked with a small smirk. You're just doing that thing I used to do, where you feel like you should be involved with everything and you can't delegate, he accused her. Deb made a diplomatic humph noise. Next to her, Frequency of Sunlight shifted her coils, dexterously rubbing the end of her tail across the back of Deb's scrubs. Anyway, I actually was going to find you later, so this works, James started, before quickly inserting, apologies for making your lunch about business, but how's the stuff going on fixing the rat roach biology? Shape or substance tests in general? Deb's eyes practically gleamed as she perked up at the question, which made James do a double take as he leaned in to peer at her face. Wait, what's with your eyes? He asked. They are fascinating, yes? Frequency of Sunlight said, laying her head on the table and rolling it to stare adoringly up at Deb, who tilted her own face away from both of them. Purple orb, not important, she said, looking like she was doing her best to avoid clamping her eyelids shut out of embarrassment. So, shaper substance, yeah. Trials are looking good. We've managed to determine component sources for the overwhelming pain, and at least a couple can be dealt with, though it gets a bit silly in places. For example, one of the problems is that organ failure sets in rather quickly as the now malleable body loses coherency. This reverts after the substance is used up. Focusing on keeping your lungs working while making changes to your own biology isn't possible for most people, so we've gone back to our old standby of post-hypnotic suggestion, which, can I just say, it's weird we have a dozen people with multiple skill ranks in that. It's not that weird, James said defensively, before Rufus swatted him on the back of his hand with the tip of one of his legs. Okay, it's a little weird. Does it actually work? James asked, massaging the small mark on his skin. Shockingly well, yes, Deb nodded. Between that, a painkiller routine that doesn't impede cognition too much, physical therapy in the days leading up to the use, as well as extensive education on personal biology and what changes will be made, I think we're almost ready to begin large-scale trials. Yeah, I've heard. Kika is excited, and maybe terrified. James's mouth twisted into a curved half-frown. It kinda sucks this is the best option we have in a lot of ways. Well, there are purple orbs that can help, but... Deb sighed. Frequency of Sunlight picked up the line of thought. They help with single things, not with bodily conditions. Also, they add. They will not change strange things. Her camera eye focused in on James as she talked. Hey, don't look at me. I didn't make them. James held up his hands defensively. Deb let out a sudden giggle at the words, covering her mouth with the back of her hand, fork poking out at an angle. She's right, though, she said. Mostly. We've actually got a combination of purples that could make a rat roach... I don't know what language to use here. Make their bodies function close to what an uninjured, able-bodied human would? Deb's shoulders slumped. But of course, the purples work differently for them, so there's no telling how some of them might alter as they cross species lines, and that still would only bring them up to almost human standard, and it would take almost 50 orbs. Which we could absolutely do, James pointed out. Of course, we could also use the potions and mundane medicine to help them manage pain until we can go through a single, simple procedure that fixes all their problems forever. Deb shrugged. And while we do that, we have 50 more cures for cancer. Of course, that is assuming it goes well, which it might not. Also, single procedure is a misnomer. We're starting with between 3 and 5 to effect the changes we've identified as necessary. Still, shaper substance is still better for them and better for our limited replicator budget. Heh, replicator budget. What happened to my life? She glanced at her watch. I should get back. No! Frequency of Sunlight hissed along with her words. Sit, lunch, enjoy time. She whipped her body around to look at James. Help make her stay. Sure, so, Deb. Oh, hell no, don't conspire with her on this. Deb crossed her arms. I agreed to a quick lunch. You haven't finished your salad thing anyway. I have a real question that can distract you, too. Actually, you might have insight into this too, Sonny. He looked down at Rufus and picked up one of the documents the stapler had brought him. Rufus here has been talking to me about including the stuffed animals in the youth group program, and I'm going to start looking into actually getting a structured education thing going. You two have a lot of experience with different species for, reasons. He idly gestured to the Camerconda. Any hurdles we should know about for a mixed species school environment that I haven't thought of? Rufus excitedly gestured in agreement with the question and interest in the topic as James concluded. Sunny hissed in thought. Don't know how long my people are children, she said, or how long it would be appropriate? She glanced at Deb. That's a possible term for it, Deb said slowly. Actually, if we have any skill ranks on developmental psychology available, we should consider distributing those to whoever ends up working on this new thing. I'm assuming it'll be called re-education? What? James blinked. No, please. Rufus scuttled forward, shifting a paper toward Deb, who started reading it with interest. Okay, so I think the issue here is we might be looking at emotional maturity wrong. We should make sure to take some time to talk to some of our staff therapists, or whoever is currently studying the Ascent's growth. Rufus, I assume you know who that is. The stapler crab dipped his body forward, clacking in agreement as he started rearranging his documents to put something else in front of Deb. Hey, what's with... James started to ask, but the two of them were ignoring him now. He turned to Frequency of Sunlight. This wasn't what I wanted, he apologized. No, but it is working, she said, with an amused lilt to her digital voice. Also, because you are curious, we think it takes 3 to 6 years of mental freedom for Camercondas to reach emotional maturity. It was still a little strange to James, the times when Sunny would switch to speaking, not exactly in a professional tone, but with professional words. She, and most of the other Camercondas, really, were a lot smarter than their sometimes limited and often strange speech patterns let on. Okay, that's good to know. This is going to end up as a complete societal mess, though. I just know it. Chaos is not bad. Frequency of Sunlight adjusted the mechanical arms on her back, settling them into a position that didn't drag on her. It brought us here, after all, to learn so much about ourselves. She glanced at Deb, still engaged in a conversation with Rufus that was very one-sided in who was speaking out loud, but appeared to have a robust information flow between the two of them. It is nice. How are you two doing, by the way? James asked with a soft smile. While your girlfriend is distracted. Frequency of Sunlight flicked her tongue over her tightly wound cable snout. Good. Good? She half asked. I do not know. The Camerconda slumped slightly, instantly going back on what she had said. I do not know what I am doing, or if I am doing things correctly, or what relationships are. It makes me happy, but I hope I am doing well. James nodded sagely. I understand completely, he said. Really? Actually, yeah, no sarcasm intended. James grinned. You could try asking Deb directly, which I find tends to help, or you could wait to learn that she is apparently very good at following multiple conversations at once in a few seconds here. James raised his eyebrows as Frequency of Sunlight tilted her head at him in confusion, shortly before Deb wrapped her arms around the Camerconda in a tight hug. Like that, he said. You idiot, Deb muttered into Frequency's head, barely loud enough for James to make it out over the growing noise of a dining room that was filling up with people. He excused himself from their moment, giving Rufus a ride out on his shoulder as he left the two partners to their conversation. All right, I got some time. Where to? James asked, and let Rufus pilot him down to the basement and the small paranormal garden that the stapler maintained. Hey, I've got to ask, how do you have time to do all of this? James said. "Do you sleep or anything?" Rufus crossed his forelegs in an X, vigorously blinking at James. "Huh," James said. "That's cool. Can I trade you for that power?" He got another X in reply. "Yeah, I'd say that too." He waved goodbye to his small friend, leaving the stapler to his plants as he tried to escape the basement once again. "Oh, hey," James smiled as he ran into a rush near the stairs up from one of the basements. "Fancy seeing you here." "Is it?" Whatever a rush had been about to say was derailed by the simple statement, a look of warped confusion crossing his angular muzzle. "Why, I live downstairs." "Down? Right. Fuck. I've been taking the elevator and teleport the whole time, so I only just learned about this and then instantly forgot it. Why do we have another downstairs?" James's own explanation was temporarily derailed, before he shook it off and gave Rush a real answer. "Anyway, it's just an idiom. Like, it means I'm a little surprised to see you because I had no expectations to, but I'm happy with the encounter anyway." Rush nodded slowly, straightening back up to near his full height and out of the cautious slouch he had fallen into at James's opening words. "Oh, I'm also happy then." His breath came in a series of rapid inhalations, steady and less painful than before, but still enough to make his chest heave like a panting dog as his heart hammered. "Hello." James chuckled. "Hi. Hey, actually, I'm going on a walk here. Do you want to come with me? Just hang out for a bit?" James tried to offer casually, attempting to not betray his own mild tempest of emotions at running into the rat roach here. Rush's offset eyes blinked in a rippling pattern that James had come to associate with a kind of suspicious disbelief. "Outside?" he asked, curling some of his arms inward. "Well, in Taunton, but yes, outside," James clarified. "A couple people wanted me to take a quick look at the neck road thing, and I'm gonna do it recklessly." "Oh, then yes." Arush relaxed again, much more comfortable in a place where there weren't dangerous life forms wandering around everywhere. "I will come with you as protection." "As a conversation partner," James replied with a hint of a smile. "I can take care of myself." Arush just chittered at him as he followed James up the stairs and into the space between the maintenance closet that James used to call an office and the door to the back briefing warehouse. James had actually thought they were going to emerge somewhere by the kitchen. The stairwells seemed to be getting harder to keep track of the longer he used them instead of easier. The lobby was bustling with activity, but not overwhelmingly so. People coming and going from around the lair, on their way to or from lunch, meeting up for conversations or exchanges of information, some of them just taking advantage of the comfortable space to relax in. All it really needed was somebody idly noodling on a guitar and an espresso machine, and it would remind James of a pleasant cafe environment. Right now, the humans outnumbered the few cameracondas and manifested infomorphs, and none of those humans were kids. It was, after all, a school day, and that thought struck James as hilarious all of a sudden. He was running around trying to fix problems, facilitate communication, explore dungeons, and a million other things. He wanted to save the world, and he was working on it actively. But to a number of the interns they had here, the most important thing going on right now was that this was the second semester of their senior year, and if they played their cards right, they might survive it. If they were really lucky, they might graduate too. Next to James, Arush sniffed at the air, tensing up again, and as James led them around the desk, he noticed why. In a beanbag pressed up against the corner of the room, a pair of newer rat roaches lurked like they were trying to watch everyone in the space at once and failing to do so. A young man sat next to them, and it took James a second to recognize that it was Marcus, usually on the phones down in response. His back leaned up against the desk, flipping through a book like he wasn't worried about anything in the world. Marcus had apparently added more pride pins to his coat lapel since James had last seen him, getting closer to the critical mass required for walking around to count as weight training. The rat roaches stared at a Rush as they approached, their antennae flattened back on their half-furred heads as they both watched him. A Rush, similarly, seemed to shrink down and walked as close to James as he could. James just waved, gave Marcus a cheerful "Sup," that got him a tip from the edge of the book and a grin. James didn't really comment on a Rush sliding up to him. The closeness felt rather warm, even if he knew it was mostly because the rat roach was still nervous around this many people. "Why are we here?" a Rush asked in a wet whisper over James's head. "Oh, sorry, we're saving telepad uses by carpooling. Which is a term for..." "Know what carpooling is?" A Rush sounded a little offended. "We lived with car people." James didn't exactly pause, because he didn't want a Rush to run over him if he stopped suddenly, but he did make a confused noise in the back of his throat. "Car people like people who are cars? Oh, wait, you mean Horizon Delvers. Nope, I got it, sorry. Took my brain a second," he said, and got a small noise from a Rush as a reply. "Anyway, we're meeting Dave and Watcher of Motion, who are headed down to Taunton for reasons." James pointed across the room to where the other two were milling around near the front door as he led a Rush across the Lair's lobby. Another Camerconda was helping Watcher of Motion affix one of their species-specific jackets around his body as James walked up with a wave. "And I don't know why they're over here," he said out loud to a Rush. "But hello." "Because it's the front door." Dave looked at him like he was dumb. "That's how you leave a building, James." "I missed this," James said, turning his head toward a Rush. "I missed this utterly earnest dumbass." "Hey, I'm not that earnest," Dave said, chuckling stiffly as he did so. James snorted a laugh. "What have you been up to, anyway?" he asked as he double-checked his phone for the Taunton address they were teleporting to and pressed his telepad up against the wall of the building to start writing on it. "Something comical and illegal, I am assuming." "Why would you assume that?" Dave cocked his head at James. "I never do that." James pocketed his pen and raised his eyebrows as he held out a hand. "Really? No flying around the country with Pendragon, breaking FAA regulations left and right?" "Karen files flight paths for me," Dave said, setting a hand on Watcher's head and taking James's hand. James offered his arm to a Rush, who paused before he wrapped a warm, chitinous paw around it. And then, all gathered up, James ripped the telepad page and sent them off to another state. Tennessee's air felt different, and James couldn't quite figure out how, only that the pressure on his skin was a little bit off. That, and the smell of the lair, which was a lot more chaotic even if it was a little pleasant, was a sharp jump away from the smell of the police station that was sterilized via green orb effect every day. "Thank you for flying air telepad," James intoned. "Your exits are to the left, thank your cabin staff." "Thank you," Watcher of Motion said politely, with a bob of his body, before promptly slithering off without another word. James watched the Camerconda go. "I hope he didn't think I was being serious." He winced to himself. "Anyway, Dave, have fun with your suspicious thing you didn't tell me about." James raised his eyebrows at his friend, but Dave just laughed, gave a quick, "All right," as he turned to walk away to the thin stairwell next to the dead elevator, leaving James standing there with a Rush. "I actually wanted an answer, though," James whined after him. "Why did you not say that?" a Rush asked, speaking up now that the two of them were mostly alone again here. "'Cause I'm an idiot," James said with a sigh. "And I tend to forget that Dave has a very literal take on conversations a lot of the time." "Is that bad?" a Rush asked, shifting slightly but not stepping away from his spot next to James. James pivoted around, stepping back a little bit to look up at a Rush properly. "Not really," he settled on. "It's Dave. Like, this isn't a Dave problem, this is a me problem. I know Dave sees things differently, and I phrased my question like I was making a joke, so, my fault. Could have handled that better." "But you don't know what he's doing." "I'm sure it's fine." "Not illegal?" a Rush ventured. "I said fine, not safe," James clarified. I'm sure he's doing something that'll dramatically upstage me later, because that's a thing Dave did repeatedly for a while there. That was before the two of us met, though. Maybe he's changed. We don't actually talk that much anymore. He just got really into taking care of Pendragon and helping everyone else raise the new paper drakes, and that's cool, but eh, eh, that's all. We drifted apart. James sighed morosely. Sorry, that was kind of heavy, and you didn't actually ask to know how I'm failing to keep my friendships up. You want to head out? Arush glanced toward the police station door, which had the shattered glass cleaned up, but was still a broken wreck that no one had bothered to fully replace in their time since occupying the building, only installing a barricade over it. Should you check in? He asked, worried. Kirk and Miles already know I'm here, so does Dave. I've got a telepad set to take us home if anything goes wrong, and really this is just kind of a simple check on behavior. James shrugged. And it's actually kind of nice outside. Though, he looked over at Arush and the somewhat tattered black hoodie that he was wearing. Do you need a coat or something? Are you going to be okay? It's warmer here than in Oregon, but it is still kind of cold if you... Fine, Arush huffed quickly. I'm fine, he repeated, more evenly. All right, let's get going. James led them to the door, then realized he had no idea how to open the half-constructed barricade. Arush, who had lived here for a while before the cleanup team moved to the hotel with actual rooms, casually reached over and unpinned a latch, pushing the boarded-up door open. Right, thanks, James grinned. Should have teleported us outside. The city of Taunton was overcast, approaching an early night, and still an absolute mess. With the power out, there wasn't going to be any streetlights, so James had wanted to get here before the actual sunset and the complete absence of light, but it was still jarring to him to be in a city with no people. The people were long gone, either dead or evacuated. The buildings were, in many cases, half destroyed, and in some cases burned down. He knew there were swaths of suburbs out there where early fires had ravaged places the Order couldn't really do much to save. But these days, with nothing left to spark fire except for errant lightning strikes, it was mostly just, well, empty. They'd driven through parts of the city, going from their claimed outpost to the dungeon, or scouring the buildings for personal effects or valuable resources. The former for the survivors of this place, the latter for the Order to keep up its own operations. But on foot, it really was something else. The police station's public front parking lot lined up with a few restaurants in a semicircle on the other side, and past that there was a big main intersection that split traffic between a road to the freeway, a strip mall, and a long path through town lined with businesses and dead traffic lights. James picked a direction at random and started walking, letting Arush fall in at his side. They carried on in silence for a couple of blocks as James watched the terrain around them. In a lot of ways, Taunton reminded him of a dungeon. There was possibly something that might be hostile here, just out of sight. There was a strange stillness, an absence of, not humanity exactly, but a lack of living. No one lived here. There were wrecked cars on the road with spikes of asphalt through them, and they'd been here since the cataclysm. Unless the Order did something, they'd be here for a while longer, too. There were buildings with freshly warped geometry, not arcane in nature, just not how buildings were supposed to look, and they stood unremarked upon, because there was no one here to do the remarking. James paused briefly as they passed a car dealership where it looked like something had cut the two-story office building in half. Part of it slumped sideways, the insides of the structure exposed, carpet and furniture and dangling wires rotting in the elements. The sidewalks were mostly clear, at least. I don't see any of the necrodes around here, James said as they crossed an intersection, voice sounding deafeningly loud, his instincts still forcing him to look side to side for incoming traffic that couldn't possibly be here. They avoid this place. Think they learned it was dangerous. Arush's clipped words sounded almost sad. Didn't know, then, he added. James glanced back at him. I never asked, he said softly. Did you fight them, ever? Shit, I'm sorry. You were supposed to be here so you could have a quiet place with Kika, not get dropped into another... Well... Arash shook his head rapidly, a somewhat alarmed look in his many widening eyes. No, he hissed. It was good, here. It is. Everyone is... kind. A pair of his extra arms ran sharpened claws across the chitin of his other arms. Once they tried to attack. Nate kept us back. Kika wanted to help, but no. We never fought. Well, good, James sighed, tilting his head up to look at the darkening clouds overhead. We're supposed to be keeping you safe, not the other way around. Can't it be both? Arash asked, genuinely curious. Is that not what you want? James stepped around a toppled newspaper dispenser, the last few issues still inside, preserving the mundanity of a last day. Sure, but you know what I mean, he said as he looked back up from the sidewalk and swept an eye around the road, looking for movement. They were walking past a fence on their left now, and he could see through the gaps a fleet of mail trucks waiting in a large lot. You two were so new, then, to us. You didn't need us throwing you into fights. Am I not new now? Arash asked, cracking his maw in a grin. Pish, James smiled. I don't know, what are you? He looked over at the rat roach, who was doing that nervous slouch again, despite James's smile, making himself look more James's height than the towering figure he was when he stood comfortably. I talked to your boyfriend the other day, you know. I heard. Arash looked away from him suddenly. I'm sorry. No, James cut him off. But... Nope, James reiterated. Stop apologizing for things. Unless... Wait, what were you going to apologize for? For everything? Arash asked, his voice sounding very small in the empty city. James stopped at the corner of another intersection, the shattered brick wall of a bank ahead of them. He leaned against a decorative tree that was still growing healthily out of the sidewalk, setting his boot on one of the roots that was cracking the pavement around it. Well then no, James said. What are you actually thinking? Take a minute, put your thoughts together, there's no rush. Let's go get on the roof of that bank. James pointed as they walked, the two of them cutting across the street. He knew there were no cars here. He knew it. But it still felt alien to not treat the asphalt line like it was an impassable river while he walked. Behind him, Arash stayed mostly quiet, occasionally chittering to himself in thought, while he helped James pry open the damaged door to the bank, and then, inside, fell silent again and followed after James as the human crossed around behind the tellers' counters into the back offices and hallways, ignoring the devastation of the asphalt spikes that threaded through some of the rooms, looking for the ladder that led to roof access. James had never been upstairs in a bank before, much less on the roof of one. He'd kind of thought it would feel special somehow, but as he leaned out over the edge once they'd made it up there to try to see if he could spot movement anywhere on the streets around them, all he felt was kind of normal. There were no people who might confront him about this, no bustle of cars and pedestrians to watch or to be spotted by. It was a nearly empty city, with almost no risk to clambering up any building he happened to feel like. The sensation of being somewhere he wasn't supposed to be, the thrill of maybe getting caught, they never manifested. The only life that might catch him up here were a few raccoons. At least the city smelled interesting. The encroaching greenery that was slowly starting in on the unmaintained buildings, mixing with the omnipresent lingering scent of rust and ash, and the creeping decay as things started to mold. There was a good view from up here. James could see a few necrodes moving in the distance down a street, and another pack behind them in a direction that led to what looked like a 3-block-long strip of park. Dead grass and withered trees cutting a line straight through streets of businesses and townhomes. Arash had moved up to stand next to him, but James didn't look over at the rat roach. Not yet. He could feel him preparing himself to talk, giving the kind of nervous breaths that James himself had done before in his own life, right before he started in on a conversation that was probably going to be fine, but it was hard to tip over the threshold of. Okay, Arush said the words slowly, the individual syllables made into their own, smaller words as he stood to James's side. He didn't lean against the ledge of the roof or relax at all as the human did turn to him now. I'm sorry we made you uncomfortable, he said, words occasionally switching between English and Spanish. Haven't known how to talk to you, or if we should, or what to do. Arush looked away, trying to avoid eye contact. You feel special. I feel like I love you, but what am I supposed to do about that? Tell you? What if you say no? Or your other partners do, or Kika does? What if I make a mistake? What if you hate me? Arush gasped in a heavy breath, and James watched the rat roach's back with worried eyes as his offset shoulders twitched. And I am thinking that I am different, that I am broken and wrong and ugly, and that you won't want me, and that I don't know what I am sorry for, or how to apologize. I don't know so many things, and... Arush's words fell off abruptly, his voice even scratchier than it normally was, as his overtaxed throat constricted on him. Still not looking at James, he slumped heavily against the concrete wall along the edge of the roof and started to slide down into a slump, his tail splaying out around him. James joined him down on the rooftop. A little more gracefully than Arush had, he slid his legs into a folded position and leaned his back against the little wall between them and open air. He didn't say anything, at first. Instead, not quite knowing what he was doing himself, but remembering, painfully remembering, what it felt like to be in the position that Arush was in, he reached over and ran a hand along his friend's shoulder. Arush flinched at the sudden contact, claws that were curled on the grimy rooftop scraping along the surface as he started to react. But James let his hand keep going, his arm wrapping around Arush's back, pulling him sideways to fold across James's chest. James was careful not to pull too hard. Arush was possibly the most heavily modified rat roach in the order. He had a lot of strength to his body, but he was still very fragile in a lot of ways. Sitting there, pulling in Arush, who was obviously trying very hard not to openly sob into his shirt, James had a sudden realization that he didn't actually feel that awkward. He knew he would have when he was younger, maybe even a year ago, but he couldn't tell exactly where the line was, didn't know where he'd changed or what had done it, and yet he felt like he was perfectly fine here in this moment. His voice still almost caught in his throat at first when he started to talk through his thoughts, though. But after clearing that, he spoke softly to the person who was now leaning heavily into him. Hell, I know exactly how that feels, James started, before realizing how dumb that sounded, and that maybe he wasn't as past being awkward as he had hoped. That whole thing, feeling like you have to say everything at once, I know exactly what that's like. He looked down at the top of Arush's head, where antenna poked out of chitin that was partially covered by patchy tan fur, the burrs on the end of them threatening to poke into James's shirt. I don't hate you. You or Kika. How could I ever? James wanted to laugh, but that didn't feel right in the moment. I've been wanting to talk to you because I do care about you. Both of you guys, really. But I'm worried about actually acting on that. Arush pressed his face into James's chest, who, at that moment, gave up on getting out of this without corrosive tear marks on his shirt. His words were clipped and raspy. Because we are... James ran a hand down Arush's back, pressing just enough for it to be felt through the sweatshirt. Because you, specifically, aren't in a mentally healthy place, he interrupted. I feel like I should be explicit about something, Arush. You not being human is not a problem for me, okay? Why? Arush asked with abrupt confusion. Why not? James shrugged with a huff of breath and decided on an answer that wasn't quite complete but was still true. I mean, it's not a priority for me. The people in my romantic life are human because they are the people I've been with the whole time, not because of preference, you know? I don't care what your body is. I care who you are. And I do like you. He grinned ever so slightly as he felt a rush shift against him at the words. I'm worried, though, because I know you're dealing with trauma and pain and fear, and you won't talk to people. You barely even talk to me, and that's when you need a trained therapist and not my stupid ass. Not stupid, Arush hissed softly. Bah, James said with a real smile. But I'm serious, this is a problem. You're so new, and not only that, you're new and hurt, and I'm terrified of hurting you more in ways I don't even consider. He kept rubbing along Arush's back, feeling out the points where chitinous ridges sat under the hoodie, feeling Arush's reaction when he traced a line around the joint of one of his secondary arms. Like this, though. I didn't realize you were so afraid to open up. I'll never hate you, even if you make mistakes, even when I make mistakes, because fuck knows that's going to happen. Arush slumped further down, sliding into a position where he was half laying in James's lap. James settled himself, trying to get the ground to not hurt his ass so much as he welcomed the warm contact while he tried to reassure his friend, who was now trying to contain the shaking in his own shoulders and the rapid hissing breaths he was letting out. Sorry, Arush said again. Why? James asked quietly. Not supposed to cry, Arush said, with a pained voice that broke James's heart. He set his hands flat on Arush's back. We're not in the sewer anymore, James said in that same calm, quiet voice. We're out here, where things can be better. It's okay to cry. It's okay to let yourself feel things. No one who matters will think any less of you. He'd said this, or something similar to it, to Arush and Kika before, but right now he felt like he could say it 100 more times, as many times as they needed to hear it. If anybody does think less of you, you can point me at them, he added. The words were like a switch flipped. Suddenly Arush couldn't stop himself. He drew in breaths with sharp, chittering wheezes, hot tears forming in the corners of his eyes. The blue glowing liquid tracing channels through his fur and dripping from his triangular face, those tears beginning to burn holes through James's cargo pants. James didn't say anything, but Arush noticed after he'd opened his eyes some minutes later. Sorry, he quickly gasped out, pulling back. Okay, why this time? Oh. James reached a hand down and poked a finger through one of the new holes in his pants. Well, at least now they look appropriate for a punk show, he said. Next to him, Arush sat himself up, sitting with his legs sticking straight out and his smaller arms propping himself against the wall. Hate that, he muttered. Punk rock? No, melting things. Kiko likes punk rock. Arush sniffed, sacrificing the sleeve of his hoodie to wipe away the tears that were sizzling against his fur. Rat roaches seemed to at least internally be resistant to their own corrosive fluids, but their fur still suffered, even if it held up better than most other things. Now what? He asked. James caught what Arush probably meant, but he asked for clarification anyway. You mean, now what between us? He asked, and Arush nodded in a jerky, worried motion at him. I don't know exactly, James said, but I mean it when I say you should be in a mentally healthy place before I'd be comfortable trying a relationship. It'd be really easy to ignore that and believe that I could help you through everything, but that's not how it works. That's never how it works. He leaned back, glancing up at the darkening sky. I'm not trying to make this a transaction either, but Arush, you need therapy. Kika is worried about you too, and I think you already know it. Yeah, the rat roach hissed out. Yeah, so that's a requirement for anything. But, I don't know. We'll see. I'd say we should spend more time together, but I spend half my life in dungeons these days. I actually like dungeons, Arush said, like he felt guilty about it. James blinked. Really? That's not a thing you were doing just because you felt like you owed us? At first, Arush admitted. But now, I don't know, some of them are beautiful. He motioned the smaller arm on the left side of his body at the rooftop they were on. Like this, he added. I feel like I'm too used to being on rooftops to know why this is special, James admitted with a shrug. But, okay, I'll trust you. Oh, also, I didn't address this earlier, but Alana is fine with whatever us ends up being. She's also been incredibly suggestive, which is, well, Alana. Anesh is fine too, but he's a normal person. So he's normal person fine, not Alana fine. Arush nodded and then stopped as he tried to figure out what the hell James had just said. Working through the sentence in his head as he mouthed the words before figuring it out and completing his nod. It is... He opened his mouth like he was going to say something before tilting his head away and hiding the flush of green around his eyes from James. Never mind. Okay, now I'm curious, James said with a smile. Arush shuffled in embarrassment. I was going to say Alana would be disappointed. Rat roaches, melt things, like condoms. James let out a small, oh, at the mental image. Okay, wait, that implies you... Is this a problem for you and Kika, too? That's kinda awful. I'm sorry. That's gotta be incredibly frustrating. But, at the risk of diving off the deep end of too much information territory, aren't you sort of immune to your own... fluids? James felt like smacking himself for how that came out. He definitely wasn't past the part of his life where he could make any situation awkward. No, I was trying. For no reason. Arush pushed himself off the wall abruptly, standing up with bits of dirt and flecks of concrete dusting off his pants and the back of his hoodie. We should... James made the connection pretty quickly and reached up to catch one of Arush's claws in his hand. Okay, part of me is embarrassed here, he said, but a lot of me thinks that is adorably thoughtful and cute, and I'm not going to feel bad about it. Also, I should skip ahead a bit to the fact that sex isn't required for a relationship. Really? Arush sounded suspicious. Yes? Yes, really, absolutely not. Romance and sex are different, James said, with increasing assurance, squeezing Arush's paw. Oh, good. But I'm also absolutely certain we can find some kind of magic to let you orgasm without putting holes in things, James said, biting down on the massive grin as he tried not to explode with laughter, watching the green glow of Arush's blush take over his entire face. He stood and brushed off the dirt from his pants that Arush had been fine ignoring. Alright, now, let's get back to... He froze, his voice stopping as he swept his vision over the streets below. Mixed in among the damaged and empty cars and the weeds beginning to peek through cracks in the pavement, there were 4 standing figures that hadn't been there before. At first glance, they looked like the outlines of humans, but they moved without a clear connection to physics. A center mass like a rough cone pointed downward sat floating over the road in slow bobbing motions, while around that point 4 dark limbs, ending with long wicked talons, were held in place by nothing in particular, unconnected to the central form. 2 of those talons acted like legs, walking the figures along the road, while the other 2 were positioned like arms, even if they weren't connected to any joints and seemed capable of pivoting freely to move between the wrecked vehicles. The 4 creatures were made out of asphalt, though James knew that inside that dark substance they contained ritually imbued chunks of human bone. That was what made them, well, alive, for lack of a better term. That was what had made them. Artificially crafted, human-made dungeon life. They didn't have heads or eyes, but as Arush joined James at the edge of the bank's roof, he realized that all of them had one of their claws extended, with an open palm facing upward toward them. Wonder if that's how they see, he muttered. And when Arush shot a glance his way, James mimed his own open hand, holding it upright at the rat roach, who nodded at him and resumed watching the approaching necrodes. James pulled his vision up and scanned around them. He didn't see any others on nearby buildings or approaching from down the street, so he made a quick decision. I'm going to go say hi, he said, turning to quickly head back to the ladder that led down into the bank. Is safe? Arush's language was back to being clipped as his anxiety rose. But he followed James closely anyway, a different kind of tension this time, the feeling that a fight might be coming, running through his blood like lightning as his body told him it was time to hurt something. He shoved that feeling aside with disgust while James spoke. Probably not, but I've got the telepad set. Here. He passed the small notepad back to Arush, who took it with a careful claw as he was entrusted with the magic artifact. Keep a hand on my arm and tear that if it gets bad, okay? Arush nodded as they moved through the ruined bank lobby and stepped out into the rapidly darkening evening. Soon there wouldn't be any light left at all, and the neckroads would be practically invisible against the streets. But James hurried around the corner anyway, staying on the sidewalk as he approached the four creatures, all of whom shifted into a geometric formation as they caught sight of him. James stopped at the edge of the road. No one quite knew the limits of the neckroads, but stepping onto the street would absolutely put him within range of them, so he held back briefly, just in case. Hello, James said to them, in the voice that he would use on a skittish dog. Can you understand me? The four figures shifted, their central bodies turning toward each other, claws widening and narrowing as the asphalt of their forms flowed in droplets, rearranging ever so slightly. None of them spoke. James held his arms out, showing empty hands. We're not here to fight, he said. We're done fighting, but we don't know how to talk. I'm not even sure you know what I'm saying, but we have to start somewhere, so I'm rambling for a bit here. He cut himself off as one of the neckroads slid forward. The creature moved without exactly stepping. Its claws technically formed a mimicry of walking, but really it was drawing furrows in the asphalt that sealed themselves behind it like it was moving through hot sand and not a solid street. It approached James slowly, and he felt Arush's paw tighten on his arm sharply as the rat roach watched it with wary eyes, claws digging into James's flesh. It stopped a few feet from the edge of the sidewalk, and James raised an arm and waved at it. Hey, he said, again in that small voice, like he was speaking to a panicked animal. After what felt like a painfully long time, the neckroad shifted itself. One of its orbiting arm claws twisted at a joint, swinging around in a slow arc. James ignored Arush's hissing breath in his ear as he watched carefully while the asphalt creature raised its own arm and waved back. Then a noise sounded from somewhere far away, a loud crash of metal and glass that echoed down the street, 4, maybe 5 blocks distant. The neckroad jerked backward, sliding across the road to rejoin its companions, but not attacking. All 4 of them rapidly weaving between wrecked cars and fallen debris to disappear around a corner and into the night, 2 of them pausing before they vanished, only briefly, as if they were looking back at James and Arush. Well, James said with a pleased smile. That went well. Man, tonight has been going great for communication. Arush hissed something that might have been a laugh as the last rays of light finally dipped below the horizon and the city plunged into a dark night. Another crash sounded, something hammering against the side of a car, this time closer. Arush didn't wait to find out what it was. He tore the telepad and took the 2 of them away.